My name's Gareth. I'm the creative director of Veloforte, and today we're joined by Renee McGregor, who is an author, a dietitian, an athlete. Renee's a Veloforte ambassador, as is Alex Dowsett. Now, Alex Dowsett is a recently retired professional cyclist at the highest level, stage winner the Giro d'Italia, our record holder, to name just a few, notorious time trialist. And Damian, we've not been introduced before, but as far as I'm aware, Damian, you coach Renee.
He does.
Yeah, I try. She's a nightmare, to be honest, but I do my best.
I pretty am. I basically don't listen to a word he says, so he's right. He's also an incredible athlete in his own right, just having come back from the Barkley Marathon. I just thought I'd put that out there, Damian, because you never promote yourself.
Let's kick things off with you, Alex, because Alex, you've recently retired from professional cycling. You are a time trial legend, if you don't mind me saying so.
Retired pro cyclist, but still cycling, still racing, still being active, fit, healthy, right, and competing, because I think at the root of it all, that's what I love doing. As a pro, we were never, we were always confined by the sponsors that our team had. And I think having, which was often great, but also it never gave you the opportunity to work with who you personally truly wanted to work with. Yeah, the minute I retired, two things happened. One, my better half signed us up for the London Marathon, and two, I got in touch with brands that I wanted to work with, Veloforte being one of them. So here we are, panic training for a London Marathon.
Alex texted me, I think, and said something along the lines of, I'm going to run the marathon. Have you got any training advice? And I'm a cyclist too. I am not the correct person to give anyone marathon or running advice. So that's why I reached out to Renee and Damian to help me help you, and to share their knowledge of all things fueling and training for a marathon, because it's quite a unique thing to train for a marathon. Why a marathon, Alex?
Fundraising for haemophilia. So haemophilia is something that I have, and I have a charity, and also working with the sort of National Haemophilia Society. Is massive. It's a massive fundraising opportunity, and I think that is pretty much the long and short of it. Would I have, if there wasn't that aspect to it, would I have just wanted to do the London Marathon? Probably not. Just because I think I was, I am aware of the trials and tribulations of learning running, having been a cyclist that has tried to be off my feet as much as possible for the last 15 years, to suddenly introduce what seems like a mind bog. I've raced 25-mile time trial events were my thing. And the concept of running that seemed like unfathomable.
You said you tried to, you've remained off your feet, and there's kind of a British cycling thing, isn't there? Why stand when you can sit? Why sit when you can lie? Etc. etc.
Yeah.
So a cyclist might live their life avoiding standing as much as possible, avoiding walking as much as possible, let alone running somewhere.
Mike Woods, one of my old teammates, said he was a runner. He was a very good runner, but he said during a Grand Tour, so Giro, Tour de France, which would pretty much take a month, we would walk less than 5 kilometers in the entirety of the month. That would, yeah. So we'd cycle 3,500 kilometers. But
so averaging 5 kilometers over a month in July to running a London Marathon, that's got to be daunting. But also, could you, before we get into the marathon, talk to us about your charity, Little Bleeders, and also what struggles do you face with haemophilia? What struggles do you face that we might not even consider?
So, long story short, haemophilia is a blood clotting disease. It's where without medication, my blood doesn't coagulate, doesn't form clots. And the problems with that are the obvious ones being, if you cut yourself quite deeply, the body finds a way around, like paper cuts, things like that. If you cut yourself significantly, that struggles to seal up, but actually the bigger issues are internal bleeding into muscles and joints. over the last 2 or 3 decades, haemophilia has gone through a massive drive forwards where the medication works and enables us to be able us to do what I've spent my career doing, but it's still quite new. And so with Little Bleeders, we focus on the young and kind of educate them that not be risk averse, but that we can be less risk averse than we used to be.
You're gonna run the London Marathon to raise money for the charity Little Bleeders. How much are you hoping to raise?
Well, we've set a target for Chanel and I to raise £5,000. I think hopefully we should sort of blast through that.
I hope that you double that. How much running have you done so far, and what have you learned so far?
I've not done enough, mainly through injury. I've never been more injured in my life as I've been this winter. There's some nods and some like I understand. So I did my first long run yesterday, which Strava was quick to tell me didn't count as long. There's a lot of people that tell you how to do things on Strava, and so that was a half marathon. Yeah, it just baffles me. I think most people need maybe a day off. I feel like I need 3. Like my hips, my knees, and ankle, all just. I can't believe the beating it gives your body from an impact perspective, and I can't believe how poor I am at pacing. Like in cycling, pacing was my thing. I could pace blindfolded, give me a distance and an amount of time and whatnot, and I could do that blindfolded, but I get it spectacularly wrong every time on a run. Yeah, not enough, but we'll see.
Let's so Renee or Damian, both. Where would you start in this situation? In Alex's situation?
I'm going to hand that over to Damian. He's the coach.
Okay. So Damian, what advice would you give to Alex to get started? Cycling is a very low impact sport, and Alex is a master of his craft. This is a complete new challenge. How should he approach getting started?
Yeah, I mean, this is fascinating, and I guess Alex has kind of said what I suspected, that yeah, I'm pretty certain the aerobic side of your fitness will be huge and is perfectly capable of a marathon. But then you've got the muscular, the tendon, the almost external side, the actual physical body that's not ready. That's used to cycling. So, and running, that's the word, impact. Running is so much more impactful than probably any sport. Even with triathletes, we see they can train so many more hours than a runner who's just running, because it's just so repetitive, isn't it? It's not just repetitive, but yeah, the joints especially, and getting that impact. So there's at least 2 things to think about here. One is surface, actually. Of course, you need to do some of those longer runs on roads, because that's what the marathon will be on. But I don't know how many times a week you're running, but I would actually encourage mixing up the surfaces. Can you get on some trails, or just a park, soft grass? That will be a bit slower at first, but I'll come on to pacing in a second. But yeah, don't worry about that. Pacing is important, yeah, if you do any intervals or for those longer runs, which should be becoming more marathon specific around now. If you can mix up the surfaces a bit and run on some softer, or at least some variety, that is going to benefit you. It's going to build sort of some lateral muscle strength. Tarmac is the hardest surface to run on. It's brutal. It hurts. So yeah, consider a bit of that. Sometimes it's an element of having to be patient, although you haven't got loads of time now. But I would have said this is why we often see fairly new runners get injured, because the internal side, the aerobic, the physiology improves more quickly than the physical, the tendons and the muscles. So it is fairly common actually for sort of newish marathon runners to get injuries, which is a great shame. But hopefully structured training, and then it's thinking about what are the other things you can do around your running. Renee's going to have some brilliant example of fueling in a minute, which is critical. But yeah, it might be a bit of foam rolling, it might be stretching, it might be additional strength work. There are some elements there. I mean, sleeping is amazing. It's one of those things, it's free. So it doesn't get promoted as much as some other things, such as, I don't know, ice baths and stuff. But sleeping is almost, sleeping and eating are probably the best 2 things you can do. So there's those ideas. And then I would say, when it comes to pacing, yeah, it's fascinating what you're saying about, on cycling, it was just second nature to you, automatic. There are some tips. We want a lot of our training to be easy. But what does easy mean? Like, that's a different pace for different people. It's different in different weathers, different terrains. The best thing I've come up with is, conversational pace. So could you have a conversation with someone? I mean, even phone a friend, maybe. Another one is, you should be able to have an easy conversation with someone on an easy run. Another thing, one little other tactic is maybe, sometimes you can just practice breathing through your nose, and that might slow you down. I wouldn't say as a long-term idea, use your nose and your mouth. So we want most of your training to be easy. That is less likely to injure you. It's going to help the muscles and tendons adapt, less dramatically, I suppose, more. So those would be my main points for now. Most of your training should be easy, depending on how ambitious you're being with the marathon. Those longer runs, I guess if you've tried to stay off the tarmac, hopefully most of the week, maybe that weekend longer run should be mostly on tarmac, and you should be trying to bring in a sort of race pace at times, particularly bothered about a time. I would just keep things easy, avoid injury. But that's probably it for now. But the fueling is really important.
I'm saying, should Alex put down the bike for the duration of his marathon efforts, or would the cycling complement his training?
Well, how many runs a week are you doing, and how many cycles?
Probably 3 runs, 2 bikes.
Okay, and do you currently have any niggles now?
No, just sort of come off the back of a calf and knee thing. Everything's right side. I've got slightly limited, because of my haemophilia, it hasn't affected me on the bike, slightly limited range of motion in my ankle, and I've really had to strengthen that up. And then there's been like a knock on with a calf thing and a knee thing, and all of that's now kind of settled down, just with sort of running, either getting injured or realizing I'm about to get injured, recovering, doing it again, recovering. Our feet are redundant in cycling. You strap them into these carbon, like, solid soles as tight as you can, so to remove them doing anything. I think there's something I heard in running, is like your feet work so hard. That's the one thing that we, like, I think as a cyclist going running, that's one thing I've struggled with. It's actually, I've had pain down the side of my foot, pain on the insole of my foot, pain on the top of my foot. The laces too tight, laces too loose, blisters.
You make it sound quite a minefield. Well, I suppose it can be. I would experiment with some different surfaces, like I mentioned. You might just find you just enjoy running on. Are you running mostly on tarmac?
A mix.
Okay.
The half marathon yesterday was on gravel, and it's I live to throw more spanners in the works as well. I live up until Monday at 2,000 meters elevation, and it's very difficult to find a flat road. So everything is up or downhill. Which again, I was not known as a good climber as a cyclist. Just again, incredible how much you slow down going uphill running in comparison as well. So I love data, I love numbers. I'm fascinated to see what my pace up here in hilly environments on gravel really sort of translates to down on a fully oxygenated tarmac road that is pretty much pan flat.
Oh wow! Yes. No, this is going to be interesting. I suppose with feet, our feet are very different, very individual. And you've probably heard you've probably had the scenario already where someone's gone, "You've got to try this shoe; it's amazing," and you've tried it and gone, "Oh, that doesn't suit me." They could aid you a bit, although I wouldn't put too much faith in that. We almost want our feet to get strong. I'm not a big fan of hugely cushioned shoes, because they remove. Some cushioning could be protective, but they can remove almost the agency of our foot. We want some foot strength. It might just take you a bit more time. You're so used to not using your feet, as you say. I I think you'll be all right for the marathon. But if you enjoy running and want to continue it more, I would expect there to be some foot strength development. And if it's not happening, I would see like a physio or a strength and conditioning coach, and I can send you 1 or 2 things afterwards, actually, for some foot strength work, which I think is quite underrated. And we really want strong toes. We want our feet to be able to plant on the floor.
Fueling for running, especially at the duration of the marathon, versus fueling in cycling. Cycling's got the luxury of being able to chew food and eat solids like energy bars, like bananas, like paninis. Whereas obviously that changes in intensity when things get hard, things like gels and electrolyte mixes are far more helpful. Alex, what have you learned about fueling when it comes to running compared to cycling? And also, you know, Renee, what can you add to?
I've written a load of list. As you've all been talking, I've got loads of things I'm going to tick off my list, if that's all right. Because
Yes, please do.
we want to give Alex the best opportunity to finish London Marathon. The first thing I'd say is that London Marathon is amazing. And it's the first and the only marathon I've ever done. And I will not do it. No, that's not fair. I won't do a road marathon again. But the atmosphere is so amazing, Alex, that regardless of how rubbish you might be feeling at points, and manage your expectations, you will feel rubbish at points, and it's completely fine and completely normal. And I think it's something you learn the more you race, the more you realize, and you've probably had it in your own races, there are points where you just know this is really painful right now, but I know I'll get over it because you've been there before. So, but London Marathon has the most amazing crowd. So, and I think when you're raising money for charity as well, and hopefully this podcast will go out and get you some more cheerleaders along the way, I think it will be probably a really, really fantastic experience. So that's the first thing I'd say, is just learn to manage your expectations a little bit. But before I go into the actual fueling, there were two things I was thinking about. You were talking about your joints and pains and issues, and there's some really, really good evidence. I'm not actually normally, and Damian will vouch for this, I'm not normally a supplement pusher in any form or manner. I'm not big on supplements, but there's actually quite a lot of good evidence for collagen in terms of strengthening our joints and tendons and ligaments, particularly as we get older. And I'm not saying you're old, but just generally as we get older, collagen becomes a little bit like our ligaments, the cross bridges in our ligaments and tendons become more they become more brittle, so because we don't have as much collagen. So for you, going from, like we said, the bike to running, which is quite a big change, that may have been a part of it. You've got enough time if you start taking collagen now that it will potentially help you for the marathon. So we normally recommend 10 grams of collagen a day, so 5 grams in the morning and 5 grams in the evening, which can be quite a useful tip. The other thing is, you were talking about recovery, so obviously you're very on in terms of understanding your body needs to recover, and as Damian says, sleep is the best form of recovery you can basically do. And I think, as Damian said, it's so underrated and probably much more important than some of the fancy trendy things that are often dangled in front of us as a quick fix. But some things you can do from an inflammatory point of view are making sure that you're having a diet that's high in sort of omega-3 fatty acids. So I don't know whether you eat oily fish, but trying to have 1 or 2 portions of oily fish a week can be really, really helpful. If you don't, and a lot of us don't, for kind of ethical reasons as well, then actually taking a supplement again in this situation would be ideal. And what we're looking for is something that's going to give you between 1 and 2 grams of combined EPA and DHA. They're the 2 sort of essential fatty acids that we're looking for, which are really, really important. What you might find as well, that helps just generally with your lungs adapting, going from high altitude to low altitude as well. So those are kind of just 2 things I wanted to put out there when you were talking about your kind of aches and pains. As Damian says, there's lots you can do. I do loads of foot work. In fact, I do, before every run, I do a little 10, it used to be 10 minutes. Now it seems to be 20 minutes. I think it's just as I get older, I need to do more. But activation type stuff, generally just with a band. I don't tend to do a huge amount more, but I just use a band and do all sorts of different movements and things that I know can help my hip flexors and help my ankles in particular, because like Damian, tend to do more off-road mountain type running, so tend to be more likely to twist my ankle. So I always want to try and get on top of that. So yeah, I mean, before I plow into what you should be doing, it'd be useful to know what you are doing in terms of fueling, whether it's changed much from your competitive days, whether you're using that same kind of application. Like, just, yeah, tell me what you're doing.
So I'm shooting for 80 grams of carbs an hour, which is, it was my go-to in cycling, but sort of very aware that running is much harder. Like an hour on a cycling, hour and a half, barely bat an eyelid at it. Whereas running, the prospect of it is quite daunting. So I think that was going to be my first question. Do those requirements change with cycling versus running?
fundamentally, no. That said, it is, I mean, the thing I would always say about fueling is that textbook is very much, we should be aiming for around 60 to 90 grams of carbs per hour when we're doing endurance sport, regardless of the endurance sport. That's textbook. But in practice, we're all very different. We're different body types, we're different physiologies, we're different genetics. And I think, and males and females are very, very different. So I have never hit 90 grams of carbs, and I never will be able to, but I know what works for me. I found an optimal that works for me. So I think it's the same for you, is finding what works for you. Technically, if 80 grams has been something you've been able to absorb and utilize well, then there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to maintain that through running. That said, as Gareth mentioned, when you're running, it's a whole different kind of, you've got a lot of gravity involved as well, whereas on the bike it's you know, a little bit less movement, shall we say. And so a lot of people, when they start fueling and running, their biggest concern is gastric distress and what can happen with that. And so training your gut is actually really, really important. It sounds like you're doing that, which is great. So hopefully that's not going to be a problem for you. But some things to remember is that, you know, the other things that can lead to gastric distress is actually dehydration. So if you're very dehydrated and then you're putting in high glucose into your stomach, then fundamentally your stomach can't absorb that very well. And so it's going to want to get rid of it at the end of the day. So it's kind of keeping on top of hydration, electrolytes, and then working out what sort of medium you want to use. Obviously with Veloforte, you've got you kind of got your gels, which I personally, what I've been doing, but my race is a bit different to yours, but I've been putting 2 Rebas in a 500 ml bottle. And that's kind of, I find it really easy, rather than, I'm not very good at ripping gels and taking them, but I find if they're in a bottle, I'll drink them. So, and that just tastes like Ribena, which is quite nice. So that'll keep me good. That'll be like probably the first hour-ish for me. It's not going to be much because it's like about 45 grams when you've got 2 of them in there. I don't know if you're going to think about using caffeine, but obviously the Doppio one is my favorite, actually. I have to be really careful that I don't have too many because I love them so much. But again, just sort of thinking about, probably, I don't know, Damian, what you think. I'd probably be saying in the last 10 to 5K, maybe having a caffeine at that point rather than too early on. What would you say?
Doesn't caffeine technically take, isn't it meant to be over 30 minutes to really?
I remember once doing a 9-person time trial at Silverstone, and just before we set off, someone gave me a caffeine gel, and I took it, you know, seconds before the race, and then it kicked in on the car on the way home. So yeah, you gotta.
Well, so the caffeine is actually, it goes into your bloodstream really quickly, which is why women who are breastfeeding are told not to drink caffeine, because it goes immediately into the bloodstream and then immediately into breast milk. So it does actually go into but the optimal effects will happen slightly later. So sometimes we can say, take a caffeine gel 15, 20 minutes before you start running. But actually what we're trying to do in a marathon particularly is, because your perceived exertion will become much more fatigued as you go through, the caffeine will just give you a little bit of a kick in that actually you might not feel quite as tired as you would do if you hadn't taken it. So that's why in those longer races, we tend to recommend you take them more tail end rather than right at the beginning, where you might get these highs and lows that you want to. I don't know if you've tried these, the Mellors. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'm not very good at chewing and running fast. It's not a forte of mine at all. Thankfully, I don't do much fast running, so I can eat these when I'm racing. But it's an art. If you can do it, go for it. But if you can't, then don't worry about it. So there's obviously fueling. It sounds like during the run, you're pretty good. Staying hydrated is key. Electrolytes are key. And again, that's going to change depending on the temperature, and who knows what it'll be like at the end of April here in the UK. I mean, anything can happen, right? So you don't know. But the other thing that's really important, Alex, is your fueling day to day as well. So like making sure that you're recovering within 30 minutes of finishing your runs and bike rides, making sure that you're getting enough carbohydrate throughout the day. And I'm assuming as a pro cyclist, you know all this, and you've probably been just hopefully putting the same principles into practice. But it is just really important to remember. I think sometimes people underestimate how much fuel they need for the amount of effort they're doing. And running in particular, it's not just about our heart rate going up, and it's also the central nervous system becoming quite tired. It's the sort of the physical, the kind of the stresses it can put on our nervous system generally, and the alertness that we need as well to make decisions, particularly when we're running. So all these things mean that you probably use more energy than you think you are. I would just make sure that you don't get sucked into the kind of lighter makes you faster type thing, which I know is quite big in cycling as well, but actually doesn't always work for everybody, because, you know, like, we have to be optimal for us. And so fueling will give you that power and that ability to keep moving forwards.
Mm-hmm.
But I think my two biggest questions, and it's something I actually struggled with on the bike, was if you're, I think you touched upon it, if you're having a high glucose drink and then you're trying to hydrate alongside, I think the two questions are, at what point does that not serve as a hydration drink? Because a lot of the time, especially in the heat, my preference would always be gels. We didn't have chews, but gels and carb drink. But then I would get to the point where I've known I've had enough carbs, but my energy levels would just fall off a cliff. And I think I got to the bottom that it was probably the hydration more than anything else. How does that balance?
Fluid losses and sodium losses are very individual, and it's a conversation Damian and I have all the time about actually a range of the athletes he works with, because it's so different. In the ideal, I'd say it's best to try and get tested so you know your own individual sodium loss. But as a rule of thumb, we're looking at probably up to, in the marathon distance, you're probably looking at somewhere between 300 and 500 milligrams of sodium per liter is what you're looking for. But obviously if it's hot, you might want a bit more, and if it's not so hot, you might have a bit less. And again, it's kind of individual. But if you're not getting the sodium in, if you're not getting the electrolytes in, you're not going to draw that fluid in, and of course that's going to mean that your legs are going to feel much more fatigued and much heavier, because they do when there's not enough fluid in the system. So but again, like you said, sometimes it can be difficult because you keep drinking water and it's just like swishing around in your stomach, and that can also feel really, really uncomfortable. And that's where the salt it's so important. So obviously there are electrolyte powders and things you can use. There are also, like, it's always useful, I think it's always a good idea to also have just some emergency salt tablets in case you get to that point where you're swishing around and it's like, actually, if I just chew a salt tablet now, then at least I can start reducing that and absorbing more of that fluid back in. Damian's got a story about electrolytes. It's probably a good one to...
Yes, I've had a misadventure with hydration a couple of years ago. So what happened to me in a very long effort, I was going for a record that was sort of 39 hours or something. Halfway through, I was having some slight tummy issues or a sense of bloating. I still don't know whether it was the food or the liquid, but I decided to cut my electrolytes for a bit. I always intended for them to be added again, but I neglected to tell my crew, and I carried on hydrating. Now and basically I got hyponatremia and got sort of leany, started leaning to one side as this thing went on, and well, what was more alarming was I felt drunk. I wasn't that interested in the record anymore, for example, even though I'd been obsessing over it for months. Yes, I was confused about what we were doing. And I even sort of said to my crew about the other runners who were supporting me, I sort of said, who are these people and where are they taking me? So yeah, I was quite confused, and it was all very strange. And certainly with Renee's help, we pieced it back together. Whether I'd simply sort of overhydrated, but actually the amount of liquid I was taking on wasn't that surprising, but I had cut my electrolytes out, and I am quite a salty sweater. If you think you are a salty sweater, then ideally adding some electrolytes or having, I also, like Renee said, always have a couple of salt tablets.
About 300 to 500 milligrams of sodium per litre of fluid that you consume, which can get quite confusing when you're in a marathon, because you probably just take sips. Every time you go past the tables the aid stations, you probably just pick up a bottle and drink some, and it's quite hard sometimes to know how much you're having. So that's where it can get a little bit more tricky. with the marathon, also with the runs that the races and the runs that Damian and I tend to do, because we tend to be carrying our packs with water in them, and you refill at checkpoints, you get a bit better on knowing how much you're taking. So you just need to be a bit mindful of that. That said, obviously, you know, if I'm assuming you're going to use Veloforte products, and their gels do have the electrolytes in them, which does help. So even having like a rough idea of how many gels you might need to consume, and then just keeping an eye on the amount of fluid you're taking can be quite useful.
Yeah, could you talk about our products, Rini? Because, you know, like our electrolytes, such as Solo, Paso, Vivo, Attivo, they have, you know, 350 milligrams of sodium in, for example, the Solo. And also our gels, you know, our Reba gel has 110 milligrams of sodium. Could you talk about how our products help kind of deliver on the sodium requirements?
Yeah, I mean, they're really, and they are really good, which is one of the reasons, you know, that it's made fueling quite simple, in the sense, like when I did the my big race last year was the Spine Sprint, and I was using the Reba gels in my bottles. I can't remember exactly. I think I had 6 in total, so 3 bottles with the Reba gels in, and then I had other things as well, because it was quite a long race.
So you were mixing 2 gels in 500 milliliters of
500
water.
mils.
Yeah.
So I was basically getting 440 milligrams across a liter, which actually, it wasn't a very warm day, so it was kind of I didn't have any salt issues. I have been caught out before, a bit like Damian, where it's been so hot and I haven't realized, and then I've felt quite unwell, and I've had to take extra salt. But for me, that worked really well, because I was on top of it, because I knew what I was doing. And then when I stopped taking, when I wasn't putting the gels in the water bottle, I was actually using chewable electrolytes. So I knew what I was doing. So it's one of those things that it's worth Alex sitting down and just having a rough plan. I mean, usually before Damian races, he sends me over his plan. That sounds really patronizing. His plan, generalizing, like, it's not normally very little at all. It's usually quite a big Excel sheet with loads of information in it that I sit there and I scrutinize over. But it's really useful, because I think then it means I can question him and go, okay, well, is that enough at that point? Like, by the time you've got to this point, you've been running for 6 hours and you've only consumed 200 grams of carbohydrate. Is that actually enough? Like, we have that conversation. So it's quite useful, I think. Appreciate the marathon is you know, it's not what like the longer distance that we're talking about, but it's still a long distance, and it's still new to you, and you're going to be out there for maybe longer than you'd like to be. And so it's useful to just have a think about what is your fluid and nutrition strategy. And it's good having a plan, and it's good having a contingency plan, because, like, for example, let's say it is hotter than we expect it to be, then it's like, okay, right, I know that probably I'm going to need to have the electrolytes I've chosen to have, but on top of that, I also need to take a salt capsule every hour or something like that. So you've got your contingency, and you're basically trying to control what you can control in these environments. Things to look out for is, you know, we talked about earlier, if you get that kind of swishing feeling in your stomach, it probably is a sensation that you're probably not having enough salt. And that is definitely, again, it's useful to have something, whether you're going to have a packet of Solo or something you can add to a bottle when you pick a bottle up, or whatever it might be, then, you know, that's for you to decide. I always say with nutrition, I will give people the volumes and the amounts they need, but I really prefer them to choose what works for them. I'm not going to tell them that you must do what I say, because it's important that you are looking forward to your fueling, and that you know what works for you, and it's something you've practiced with as well. So I know people say to me, well, but because what I have is not going to necessarily be the right thing for everybody else. And also, like, you know, again, Damian and I tend to do races where you do eat quite a lot as well. So you're eating quite a lot of real food, which again has salt already in it. Whereas in the marathon, you're unlikely to be doing that. So, you know, you will need to definitely think about ensuring you get that hydration, carbohydrate, and electrolyte balance correct for you. So on your long runs over the next couple of weeks, I'm assuming you've got a couple more longer runs coming in to practice, really practice your fueling, really think about what you might need and when you're going to take them, and see how you go with that.
Yeah, Alex, you've got a story about kind of low sodium issues. Was it the Giro d'Italia? You told me a story about.
Yeah, so there was this. It's funny, cycling versus running, and I noticed with triathlon when I got involved with that, it sounds like running, the big focus is electrolytes. And in cycling, it just isn't. Cycling is all about the carbs. Like, how many carbs are you taking in? Like, we just do not talk about electrolytes or salt or anything like that. I think it's in the majority. I'd imagine the teams that are winning are the teams that are getting these things right, but in the teams that are not winning, it's which I was a part of at times. It's just not something that's spoken about. And I noticed in a particularly hot race, the team had introduced a new energy drink, which was made by scratch, which was super, super high sodium. The following day, I was up in the night 3 times to pee a tiny amount, like just busting for a pee, and then barely anything's coming out in a very dark yellow. And then the next day I had an absolutely awful day on the bike, and I just had sweat, like salty, like I'd never seen before in my life. And I was like, actually, then I think, and some people would look at that and go, he's a salty sweater. It's like, well, actually, no. Like, I've sweat a lot of salt because my body clearly needed to get shot of it all. And coupled with that, I had a dialabolical down the bike. What I then did at the Giro is I went the other way. I was like, I am not a salty sweater at all. My sodium, the sodium levels required are next to 0, and I just overcooked it. The other way, because we'd have a chef at races, the chef would be instructed to let the riders put their own salt on any of the food. So whereas at sort of less important races, we'd be at hotels, and the hotels would probably salt everything. So suddenly I've gone from having probably like too much at this race where I've gone badly to like come back to a normal race where we're eating out of like hotel restaurants where we're having a normal amount of sodium, and I'm performing sufficiently well. And then we've gone to this really important race where we've got this chef who's not understandably not putting sodium on the food, and then I'm having 0, and my performance just plummeted, and I ended up with some real nasty. I had to pull out the race with some like vomiting, my kidneys hurt, quite a scary experience. Where and that was going too far the other way.
Yeah, it's a bit of trial and error in everything, isn't it? It's, you went too much salt, and then not enough salt, and then that's the only way you can really learn how to see what your body needs. A
lot of people, when I started running, because a lot of what I do is public facing on social media, and a lot of people with the marathon talked about a wall. Everyone talks about you're going to hit a wall at some point. And I was like, okay, right, that's going to happen. But then they also spoke, when I started running, I was like, I find this quite difficult. I don't know how to carry everything that I need. Like, I don't know how to carry my nutrition, my bottles, and everything bounces, and nothing's got pockets, and it's very different to like run. It's very different to cycling. A lot of people on social media just laughed at me. They were like, no, yeah, you're doing it wrong. Like, running, you just go run. You leave everything at home. You don't take any of this with you. And I kind of pieced together. I was like, okay, we've got this is an endurance event, 4 or 5 hours. If you sent me out for 4 or 5 hours on a bike, without any kind of nutrition, I'd be home after like 1.5, 2. I was kind of like, am I adding 2 and 2 here? So the wall that everyone's hits, because they're like, and even my partner, who she did an Ironman last summer, she's like, no, the wall exists. I was like, the wall, everyone, no, it's not nutritional, it's mental. But I know that if you're underfueled, that becomes a mental thing before it becomes because ultimately everything is signals to your brain telling your body to just stop. Do you think I'm on the right lines in that perhaps 90% of the wall that everyone seems to hit in a marathon is nutrition or electrolyte or hydration based?
Fundamentally, the wall is very much when you have completely and utterly demolished your glycogen stores. So we've only got a certain amount of capacity to carry glycogen in our bodies. At most, we can probably carry 500-600 grams, depending on our sizes. And women, it might be more like 400-500 grams. And that's going to last you, if you're going at a moderate pace, and I'm talking moderate, which would be kind of, you know, pretty much what Damian was saying, that kind of almost that conversational pace, maybe slightly faster, that will last you at most 2 hours, at most. What happens in a marathon is a couple of things. People get excited. People go off too fast. People think it doesn't matter, I feel amazing. And then they get halfway and realize they've been doing, you know, 30 seconds per mile faster than they should have done. And actually what they don't realize is we're like cars in that respect, that if we go faster than we should do, then we're going to use more fuel than we should do. And so fundamentally and if you're then not taking any fuel, because again, the biggest mistake I see in all runners is that they wait for that 90-minute window before they start fueling. And actually you should start fueling within the first 20 to 30 minutes in order to prevent you from ever getting to the point where you completely empty all your stores out. So if you fuel correctly, as in you start taking fuel on early and you keep to the pace that you have been training at, you can roughly work out then what fueling you need to keep going. When we hit the wall, we've got to the point where not only have we completely depleted our glycogen stores in our muscles, we've depleted our glycogen stores in our liver as well. And that's why the brain is going, nah, not going anywhere now, I'm done. That's it. There is nothing left. You are not doing this. And that's why people hit the wall. So yeah, absolutely. If you fuel correctly and you pace strategically, you shouldn't technically hit the wall. There will always be moments where your hips are going to hurt or your back's going to hurt and your brain is still going to go, that's your central nervous system going, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. But that is mental resilience, and you do learn to overcome that because you know that comes and you can let that go. And again, you've probably experienced that before in your longer races anyway. But yeah, the wall does exist. It's not mental, it is physiological. I think people don't appreciate, and I think when it comes to, there are a lot of runners out there who do not fuel. They do not believe they need to fuel. They do not realize that fueling will actually make them a better runner. It'll also help them prevent getting injured. And fundamentally, actually, you don't, again, one of the biggest mistakes I make is people going, yeah, well, I'll just make it all up when I get back. And that also doesn't work. You know, like by fueling properly before you run, during you run, and immediately after you're running, actually you get the hormonal cascades that you need for progression and adaptation. If you don't fuel properly, you don't get those growth hormone releases, you don't get that response that you need, and you don't progress, you don't get better. So the fueling is really integral, but it's knowing how to do it properly.
How does underfueling increase your risk of injury?
Because when you underfuel, you're not giving your body what it needs. So in two ways, if you're underfueling during, you're going to have a higher breakdown of muscle during your actual event. So then that means if you then don't fuel properly again afterwards, you're never giving your body enough fuel to do the repair work it needs to do. Every time we run or cycle or even do gym work, we're getting many, many micro tears in our muscles. And these are normal. This is what we want to happen. But then those micro tears need to rejoin and become stronger and bigger fundamentally for us to progress and get stronger. If you don't fuel properly, there's not enough energy in your body to do that work. So fueling, when we take in energy, the way that humans have evolved is that all energy is directed to movement first. So any training, any sort of day-to-day walking or running, or whatever we might be doing, like running around after a toddler or whatever it might be, our body's going to use that energy first, right? And then it's whatever's left over is what is known as energy availability. And if energy availability is not sufficient to maintain all your biological processes, which is your central nervous system, your brain, your endocrine system, your digestion, etc., if there's not enough energy to do that, slowly, it will start to downregulate that, and it will prevent you from being able to do those normal biological processes. Now, immediately, you might not notice that, but over time, they usually say, you know, you'll start seeing the negative consequences of underfueling usually once you've been doing it for about 3 weeks. As quickly as 3 weeks, but often it won't necessarily demonstrate to you as like an injury or poor recovery or whatever, probably for a few months. And then obviously it can get worse the longer you leave it. So underfueling is a classic. I mean, it's kind of what I deal with every single day in my clinic. It is the main reason why people end up coming to see me, is because they're not getting the results they're looking for, or they're getting repeated injuries, or they're noticing, you know, physiological changes that they're like, I don't understand why this is happening to me. And fundamentally, it's usually because they're underfueling.
Have you ever experienced, you know, real underfueling, Alex?
Oh yeah, probably the first 7 or 8 years of my career.
7 or 8 years. That sounds, you know,
Yeah.
a long time to endure those effects of underfueling.
Yeah, I mean, probably not for races, but I really discovered later in my career that I was fueling. Yeah, I went through a real journey with weight and race weight, and maybe I'm not being totally fair. I think on the most part, like if you took my week intake and out incomings and outgoings, it was probably around about right. The timing a lot of the time was wrong. So I think certainly when I really started to hone in on trying to drop weight, and like I said, I like numbers. I don't like the guesswork. So I was using my Fitness Pal, tracking everything that goes in, everything that goes out. The mistake I made was I would take a day as when I wake up to when I go to sleep. So say I've done a 6-hour ride, it's probably like 5,000 or 6,000 calories. I'm eating a huge amount afterwards. And what I was then doing, I think I had 1 year where I lost 2 or 3 weeks worth of training, and without fail, it would be the day after a rest day. And I'd know it from my body weight as well. If I generally training would be 3 days on, 1 day off, my weight would track up through the 3 days on. No, sorry, beg your pardon. Weight would track down during the 3 days on, and then sort of come back up on the rest day. And then it'd be that kind of, if I'm trying to lose weight, the graph would be like that rather than sort of that, and that it'd have to. Anyway, so what I was doing, I was on a rest day, then suddenly I'm eating like 1,800 calories, and I'm just not fueled for like the next day, and I'd know it because I'd get on the scales and I've lost even more weight, and I came to realize that it's like, oh, I'm in trouble today, and then you just go to do an effort and it just wouldn't be there. Interestingly, so a month ago I did on the bike threshold tests. So I don't know if the equivalent exists in running, but to determine our threshold in cycling, there's a pretty basic 12-minute test where they just wind up the power on the turbo trainer rod, so this thing, until you cannot pedal anymore, and then the software will give you a level of threshold. And I did 4 in 4 days. The first one was like fresh, as in I haven't trained for 3 months. Where am I at? The second one was overheated. So to put the heating in the room up to 27 degrees. Most people watching the YouTube video couldn't believe that I could afford to put my room up to 27 degrees for that amount of time with the current prices of electricity and heating. The third one was underfueled. So after the second one, I did not touch a single carbohydrate between the next test. And then the final one was just like, after 3 tests, like, have I improved, as in have I got better at the test? I thought the overheated test was going to be the worst, but it was actually the underfueled. And there was some interesting stuff that happened. In the overheated, my ability to concentrate just went out the window. But it was only a couple of, like 3 or 4% drop in power from the previous day. The underfueled one was super interesting because I was very aware of my body's energy systems. I'd found out from a previous test that I'm a bit of a hybrid on the bike in terms of burning fats and burning carbs. At low intensity, I burn fats and then I switch to carbs at a certain point. I pretty much felt, now I don't know if that's like I know it's going to happen, so I thought I felt it happen. But when I got to a certain like power output, suddenly it just felt like there was a switch in my body where my body's like, right, we're going to burn carbs now. There's nothing here, like we're in trouble. And immediately I just had this, I was starting to hate what I was doing. I wasn't enjoying the process at all. The concentration loss wasn't as bad as the overheated day, but certainly that existed. And I just really had this running on empty feeling, and it was a good I think it was like a 12% drop in power compared with like fresh, and that was to me, that was, yeah, it was surprising just how much worse than overheated that was.
You mentioned something there, Alex, was that you started hating what you were doing.
Mm.
And the reason you're an athlete, the reason you're a cyclist, the reason you're a runner is because you love that sport, that activity. So I think it's fascinating how being underfueled can make you hate the thing you love, and how being fueled can make you love the thing you love. And the third step to that is when you have fuel that you love, it makes you love the thing you love even more. And I think that's why I'm the creative director of Veloforte, you know, because I love the fuel that makes me love my sport.
So in cycling, we have these rice cakes, and the term rice cake that we eat is an insult to the word cake, because they're like clumps of rice bonded together with something. It's just like, it's dry, it's horrible. It's only about 25 grams of carbs, and so the same as a Reba gel. And I haven't had a rice cake in about 5 years, because I'm just like, and it's the same in running. If you're looking forward to what you're eating, it's easy to eat. If you know it's going to taste like crap, and you're going to have it's going to like dry, it's a process to eat, then you're not gonna, you might ignore it. You might go, I might just be all right without it. It makes it much easier to not.
My first instinct was, blimey, that's going to cause a lot of fluid balance changes in people, because when you eat rice, you fundamentally hold a lot more fluid. So I was very confused. I know the person that brought them out as a food on the bike, and I was a bit like, oh, I wouldn't have done that personally. As a dietitian, wouldn't have been my way of creating fuel for athletes, but lots of people use them. So it's there's obviously something in it.
Really, what are your favorite running foods and fuels and Veloforte products?
So I like to mix it up, as you know, Gareth, because of the kind of length of time, the length of time I'm usually out running. I say running. Can we say running, Damian? Like, I do a bit of hiking while I'm out on these trails, but
moving,
fast movement,
yeah. So I do tend to do a real mix. So I will always use the Reba. That's like my go-to. I'll put it in the bottle. I'm absolutely that is, when I did the spine sprint last summer, I genuinely think this is what was the reason. Like my fuel, I said to you, didn't I, when I finished, Damien, I was like, I fueled the best I've ever fueled. And it showed. I mean, I podiumed at that race, and I didn't even expect to finish. So I was quite pleased with that. So I had a lot of these.
And what's the Reba gel doing for you nutritionally, really? What's this giving you that's enabling you to be your best?
I think for me, I mean, obviously it's carbohydrate, right? And we need carbohydrate. I mean, you know what you were saying, Alex. I mean, the physiology of all humans is that we tend to use a mix of fat and carbohydrate all the time. That's just normal. And obviously, the higher intensity we go, we know that the human body needs glucose. That's the currency it prefers to use. And so carbohydrate is really the essential fuel when you are running, cycling, rowing, whatever you're doing. It really is important. It's the currency the body prefers. So with a Reba, you're getting, when I was putting it in a bottle, I was getting, like I said, about 45 grams of carbs in my one bottle. And I think because I started drinking really soon. We started at midday, so I was drinking within the first 10 minutes. And I think because of that, my fueling was really kind of just steady, because I was drinking, and then every sort of 30-40 minutes I was eating something. So I had a mix of things like mini cheddars. I also really love a Marmite bagel, like it's my go-to. So I always have like a quarter of a bagel every sort of half an hour, and that works really, really well for me. But we didn't have Mellors then because that was a year ago, but I used the other think the cherry ones, the guarana ones that had a bit of caffeine in them as well. Yeah, I used those. I did have a caffeine gel as well. Like I said, I love these. I think I had about 4 of these, if I'm honest. So I tend to mix it up. If I'm, I do need real food on my races because I'm out for quite a long time. When I'm getting tired, I tend to rely more on Veloforte because I know it delivers. I know it's easy. I know I like the taste of it. I don't have to think about it, and I just can consume it. So it's just easy. Whereas when I'm more alert and kind of at the start of a race, I'll try and eat a bit more just because I've got a bit more energy to think about it. So that's kind of, they're my favorites, I guess, is probably mini cheddars, bagels, and the 2 gels, I think, are probably my absolute favorites, if I'm honest.
So my question, why Veloforte gels? Why not any? There's so many gels in the world. Why Veloforte?
I just haven't liked the taste. Genuinely have found, I've tried pretty much every single gel on the market. You can imagine, as a dietitian, I get sent so much. And I genuinely, I mean, I won't say the brand, but I had a gel sent to me and I did use it on a run and I threw it back up. It was so bad. So like, there are some pretty horrific tasting things out there. And if you don't like the taste of it, as we've all said, you're not going to consume it. You're just going to ignore it, right? So, and I know the other thing about Veloforte is I love the thought that's gone into it. You know, I like the idea that it's based on real food. It's, you know, there's sports science behind it, but there's also the love of food behind it. That's really unusual in a sports product. And I think it sort of aligns with the way I think about food, is that it needs to perform, but it also needs to taste really good and feel like I'm doing good with my body. Because, you know, when you're consuming a lot of high sugar stuff, it can feel a bit uncomfortable at times, particularly in the world we live in. But when you know that it's been designed specifically for a reason and they've put a lot of thought into it, I think you just feel a bit better about the choices you've made.
What about digestibility of Veloforte products versus other brands, due to the natural ingredients versus synthetics?
Go on,
Alex.
Yeah, maybe Alex, you go, because I'll be honest, I've not often had problems with products, so maybe not one for me to say.
Yeah,
no, but I mean, my other half did. I've been pretty good with sort of that side of things, but Chanel, when she did the Ironman, was by the time she got into the final 35 kilometers of the marathon, she wasn't keeping anything down and using a different brand gel. And it was a case of she'd take a gel because she knows she has to, but she'd have to time it to when the next bathroom stop was on the course. And this is just something was going on, because Renee, you'll know far better than I. There's no way that could be passing through you in a matter of 10 minutes. I wouldn't have thought, but I don't know. But it's something was upsetting her, and so no energy was being absorbed, that's for sure. And I know Chanel, who's out for a 28K run today, she gets on far better with the Veloforte product. It just and she just knows her stomach is more reliable in that sense as well.
A lot of gels don't have very many electrolytes in them, and I think the Veloforte, they've got that. Like I said, you've thought it through. There's a sports science with the deliverability of it, which is great. When we're running, when we're doing a lot of endurance sport, our blood flow is being diverted away from our stomach to our muscles, and so we need to keep that environment in our stomach as neutral as possible. So if you're getting dehydrated, as we said, and then you're putting in a gel, it is going to come straight back out fundamentally, because there's nothing in the stomach to be able to digest it. And so if that is a hostile environment because it's really dehydrated, anything concentrated is going to want to come out, basically, in the nicest possible ways of saying that. So I think, I know we have lots of conversations, and what I love about working with you guys is that we have lots of conversations about the products, like what are the benefits, how can we make it better, what can we talk about, how does this fit in, not just with the sports aspect, but also how does this fit in with day-to-day living, and how do we make sure that we're giving the right messages across. Like, I've had quite a few people contact me recently about the new bars that have we've put out with the sort of the high fiber bars, and they're like, but there's so much sugar in them, and I'm like, but most of that sugar is coming from the dried fruit. So, you know, yes, there's a high sugar content, but it's coming from a source that's also delivering you with iron and zinc and nutrients that you need as well. So there's a lot of education that we do as well alongside just, here's a product, off you go and use it. And I think that's what makes it a very holistic brand to be part of as well, is that, you know, it's not just, I think so many brands like, you know, have this and you'll perform better, but actually sometimes we want to know about other aspects of the product, how it's produced, what, you know, from, like, I know Damian will be keen on like the sustainability angle of products and all those things. They're really important to runners and cyclists and endurance athletes. So I think you want to find something that fits you as a person. And for me at the moment, this Veloforte fits me, but you know, I think it's like we said, it's always important that you find the product that works for you. But I always recommend the Veloforte.
Yeah, I guess every athlete goes on a journey of trial and error and finding out what works for them. I hope that our products can shortcut that process as much as possible. So if you start with Veloforte, you're less likely to face these issues. Therefore, you'll become a better athlete quicker. You'll make fewer errors on that journey. But also, if you are, you know, a regular athlete, an established athlete, that you've got fuel that you love and you can rely on and you look forward to. And it's for me, you know, the reason I joined Veloforte is because this is high performance. It's delicious and it's 100% natural. There's no compromise. Most sports products, there is a compromise somewhere, whether it's flavor or the quality of ingredients or the way it performs. And for me, Veloforte has no compromise, and that is absolutely why I'm sitting here today. We could have carried this on all afternoon, so I'm going to have a hard job kind of editing this now, because I know that there was so much more things I wanted to cover. But maybe we'll do another one with another topic in mind. So,
and Alex, best of luck for your run.
Yeah,
best of luck.
good luck,
Thank you.
Alex.
Thanks very much, guys. Really appreciate the help.